Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan. Erin O'Toole has lost a vote to remain the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. The party's members of Parliament met virtually today to cast secret ballots. This was after about one-third of them signed a notice that triggered a leadership review. Ontario MP and National Caucus Chair Scott Reid said in a statement that 73 Conservative MPs voted to replace him, while 45 endorsed him. There are 119 Conservative MPs, including Mr. O'Toole, and as Caucus Chair, Mr. Reid said he did not vote. Conservative MPs will now choose who will serve as the party's interim leader. The senior convoy leader of the anti-vaccine mandate protest in Ottawa says the fastest way to clear the streets is for residents to call their elected officials and urge them to end all COVID-19 restrictions. They are once again vowing not to leave the capital until their demands are met. This comes as police are spending about $800 a day to supervise the protest and respond to emergencies. There are calls for some of the millions of dollars raised in a GoFundMe campaign supporting the demonstration to foot the bill. All right, well, turning to another protest in Alberta, where there has been a head-on crash, an assault, and incidents of harassment at an illegal blockade at the Coots border crossing in southern Alberta. Some vehicles left yesterday as the Mounties prepared to make arrests, but others sped through police roadblocks to join the blockade, causing the crash and prompting an altercation between the people involved. Some protesters have harassed the local mayor and his wife by taking pictures through the windows of their home, behavior that the RCMP says is not very Canadian. Well, more provinces say they are preparing to loosen COVID-19 restrictions in the coming weeks. This even as virus-related hospitalizations remain at record highs in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. British Columbia says gathering restrictions will begin to slowly be eased later this month. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is optimistic that the province will be able to remove its vaccine passport program by month's end if hospital pressures decline. Quebec will reopen gyms and spas on February 14th, and Premier François Legault is scrapping a plan to tax people who are not vaccinated against COVID-19. Experts say the Omicron wave of the COVID-19 pandemic seems to be tapering off, but the path ahead is uncertain. Dr. Isaac Bogosh, an infectious disease specialist at the University of Toronto, says just because case counts decline or level off, it doesn't mean the danger has completely receded. Dr. Bogosh says, quote, "You still have to come down the other side of the mountain, and it's a really tall mountain." He suspects the danger will gradually decline as we have more community-level protection through vaccination rates and recovery from infection, or both. The Canadian Medical Association, international anti-poverty group The One Campaign, and other organizations want Canada to do more to support COVAX, the Global Vaccine Sharing Alliance. They say boosting COVID-19 vaccination efforts in less developed countries is the only way to prevent the rise of new variants and end the pandemic. More than two-thirds of the 10 billion vaccine doses administered in the world have gone into arms in high and upper middle-income countries. This while 9 out of 10 people in 28 low-income countries still haven't had a single dose. More than 850 people have been assigned a special number to help avoid being inadvertently ensnarled by Canada's no-fly list. Public Safety Canada says a dozen of these travelers have been cleared to board an aircraft, this as a direct result of having this personal code. The program began in November 2020. And the department has touted the rollout of the Canadian travel number as a key step in revamping passenger screening procedures. This comes after many young children were stopped at airports because their names are the same as or close to ones on the no-fly roster. Well, it looks like 2 multiple medal winners will carry the Canadian flag on Friday in Beijing. Women's hockey captain Marie-Philippe Poulin and short track speed skater Charles Amelin will be Canada's flag bearers at the opening ceremony for the Winter Olympics. Ms. Poulin has won 3 Olympic medals, while Mr. Amelin has 5, including 3 gold. She's calling the honor a pinch-me moment. All right, well, meanwhile, North America's weather predicting groundhogs are split when it comes to how much longer winter will last. Nova Scotia's Shubenacadie Sam saw her shadow and is predicting 6 more weeks of winter, while Ontario's Wiarton Willie claims an early spring is on the way. Thousands gathered at Gobbler's Knob in Pennsylvania this morning as Punxsutawney Phil emerged from his burrow, saw his shadow, and predicted 6 more weeks of winter. Let's hope Wiarton Willie is right this time around. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with a look at the removal of Erin O'Toole as leader of the Conservative Party. We'll have that and more coming up next. Erin O'Toole has been ousted as federal Conservative Party leader by a vote of 73 to 45. Caucus members cast secret ballots this morning. This was after about 1/3 of them signed a notice that triggered a leadership review. They are now expected to choose an interim leader. Erin O'Toole was elected Tory leader in 2020 after running as a true blue candidate. But he came under fire from grassroots party members for flip-flopping on several issues and trying to steer the Conservatives in a more moderate direction. Well, with us to unpack this situation and what it means for the party is Mr. Yanni Makris. He is a political consultant with the Daisy Consulting Group. Mr. Makris, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima. Thank you for having me.
So take us back to what led to this vote to remove Erin O'Toole in the first place.
Well, first and foremost, I think there were a multitude of different factors that resulted in the removal of Mr. O'Toole. Whether it was flip-flopping on issues like you had said, or the inability to take a specific side with respect to COVID-19 measures, or even his desire to move the party in a more progressive or moderate direction, I don't really think it's accurate to conclude that there is one specific issue that resulted in the removal of Mr. O'Toole.
So was the result of this secret ballot vote expected for you?
I mean, personally, I didn't expect it. I mean, politics is full of surprises. I mean, the final vote was 73 to 45, and I think that says a lot, especially when only 35 MPs signed a letter to caucus looking for his removal. And I think that what was most surprising was that 73 actually voted to remove him.
All right. Well, we mentioned Mr. O'Toole was aiming to move the party in a more moderate direction, which some MPs disagreed with. So what are these main divisions within the Conservative Party currently?
Of course. I mean, like, there's always been tension within the Conservative Party since the departure from Stephen Harper and arguably since the formation of the party in 2003. The divisions between the social conservative wing and the more progressive red Tory wing have been amplified in the media, especially in recent times. And that's obviously no secret. But I mean, look, this is what happens when you have a Big Tent party, especially one that focuses on grassroots and enables party members to have a say in the direction of their party. But I mean, at the end of the day, not everybody's going to agree, and that's just politics.
And Mr. O'Toole isn't the first Conservative Party leader to have left this post. We know in December 2019, Andrew Scheer resigned, and now O'Toole has been ousted in 18 months. So what does this say about the current state of the Conservative Party?
Well, I mean, I think the consensus right now among the general public is probably that the party is in crisis. I certainly don't think that's the case. Rather, I think it's an opportunity for the party to come together with diverse ideas. But again, the perception of disorganization and internal disagreement is certainly discouraging for people outside of the political bubble. And I think that's what politicians and staffers tend to forget, is that how's the general public going to perceive, infighting within the Conservative Party?
All right, Mr. Makris, just about 2 minutes left here, but are there any immediate impacts to be had from Erin O'Toole being voted out as leader?
Oh, for sure. Like I said, right now the party looks fragmented. What we're going to see now is kind of a scramble to find an interim leader, which will happen tonight at 7 p.m. And that'll be selected by caucus with an eventual leadership contest. And that leader is going to have to resell the Conservative brand, that it's united, and that and ultimately lead the party to the next leadership election.
All right, Mr. Makris. Well, walk us through the process to select a new official leader of the Conservative Party and how it will likely pan out.
So, I mean, first things first, caucus has to elect a new interim leader who, according to the party's constitution, cannot be nor become a candidate in the leadership selection process. Afterwards, the leadership election organizing committee will begin planning a leadership election, giving an election date and a campaign period. But I mean, it's too early to say when this will happen, as it does take a lot of planning to be able to facilitate a leadership race.
Okay, well, just a minute left here, but MPs, as you mentioned, will now need to choose this party's interim leader. Who are some likely options right now?
Look, obviously, the first person that comes to mind is Pierre Poilievre. It's no secret. I mean, he's been the most popular Conservative politician for quite some time now. few other possible contenders are Leslyn Lewis, who have always had the support of the social conservative wing of the party. But, Nima, I also think that there will be calls from former Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall, former interim leader Rona Ambrose, and former PC leader Peter MacKay, who in fact was a 2020 leadership contender, to put their names forward. But either way, I think that we'll be seeing some familiar names and faces in the next conservative leadership race.
Minister Yanni Macris, a lot to keep our eyes out for as this situation develops. But thank you so much for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with our weekly medical update. As COVID-19 restrictions ease, how will the healthcare system cope? We'll speak with Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director with Apple Tree Medical Group. And of course, after that, more news from around the world. So stay with us on Forum Daily News. We'll be right back. The World Health Organization chief says 90 million cases of coronavirus have been reported in the world. This since the Omicron variant was first identified 10 weeks ago, which amounts to more than in all of 2020, the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. With many countries easing restrictive measures, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus cautioned that Omicron should not be underestimated, even though it has shown to bring less severe illness than earlier variants. He cited a very worrying increase in deaths in most regions of the world. This comes as COVID-19 health restrictions begin to ease across Canada, and some provincial leaders begin to think about potentially living with the infectious Omicron variant and any others that may pop up. But how do we go about that without overwhelming our health system again? Well, joining us now for our weekly medical segment is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Apple Tree Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Pleasure to join you.
So what is the current state of Canada's healthcare system following the emergence of the Omicron variant just 10 weeks ago?
Well, what we're seeing is a health system that is strained by a pandemic wave that's hit at the worst possible time. It's caused significant illness in our own healthcare workers, which means less staff in hospitals, and clinics are filling up with COVID-19 patients more than ever, and they need hospitalization and care. To keep up, the hospitals have asked staff to forego holidays or take overtime shifts, which of course means asking healthcare workers already exhausted by 2 unrelenting years to take on more work. The problem is global, however. A report from the International Council of Nurses this week said that sickness, burnout, and staff departures are taking a toll on the world's nursing workforce, which has been unseen so far in the pandemic.
And how does all of this compare to the beginning of the pandemic when it first emerged in 2020?
At the beginning, we saw our healthcare workers energized, ready to take on the challenges of this new disease. Initially, there was very little we knew about COVID-19, but over time, we've learned about its virulence, effective sanitation methods, vaccinations, and we were quite successful in deploying those vaccines to help battle the infection. But during that time, our healthcare workers were strong and resilient. But even this incredible resilience may be fading for many. And I think there's only so much we can ask our frontline workers to do.
Indeed. And on that note, we've seen a surge in 2020 on the onset of the pandemic. The Delta variant caused a surge, and now we're seeing surges in Omicron. How have these multiple surges in cases affected the morale and mental health of health workers from your personal experience, Dr. Raut?
It's a good question. I think the COVID-19 science table, which is the advisory table for Ontario, sums it up quite well. In the spring of 2020, the prevalence of severe burnout was about 30%. Not a great number, but there we are. But what we know now is the prevalence of severe burnout is greater than 60% in Canadian physicians, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. The ones that are at particular risk are intensive care setting workers, COVID-19 units in hospital, emergency departments, as well as nurses and younger healthcare professionals or trainees have been at a much, much greater risk of burnout.
Some very concerning numbers there, Dr. Raut. So what needs to be done to ensure our healthcare workers are not further overburdened as more restrictions ease across the country?
So as Canadians, we do take pride in our public healthcare system, but by failing to really adequately invest in it, governments can leave that vulnerable, especially to the ravages of a 2-year-long public health emergency. If healthcare workers leave and are not replaced, thanks to training or certification backlogs, cap wages, or even the perception of a punishing profession, that all hurts health system capacity.
All right, Dr. Rao, just about a minute and a half left here, but switching gears, last week we really talked a lot about this new BA2 Omicron descendant. It was relatively new last week, but what are the most latest developments around this BA2 Omicron descendant?
That's right. So what we know now is BA2 is likely much more transmissible than the common BA1 or the original Omicron, and it's been able to infect vaccinated people, according to a very recent Danish study. The study looked at coronavirus infections in more than about 8,000 Danish households between December and January, and they found that the people infected with BA2 were roughly 33% more likely to infect others compared to BA1. So we expect these results are relevant to us as well. But the good news is preliminary analysis shows hospitalization risks are the same between BA2 and BA1.
All right, Dr. Rao, just about 30 seconds left here, but what does normalcy look like for you as we try to potentially live with COVID-19?
I think once we go past the Omicron peak, we're going to see COVID-19 more as an endemic disease here. At that point, I expect there will still be some need for masks and, of course, hand washing. But it's going to look like the flu, where we get an annual vaccine booster to keep our immune system strong against COVID-19.
All right, Dr. Rao, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with a look at news happening around the world. Major oil-producing countries are sticking to a plan to gradually restore deep cuts to oil production that were made during the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The alliance of OPEC members, led by Saudi Arabia, and non-members, led by Russia, agreed today to add 400,000 barrels per day in March. The move comes as oil prices hover near their highest levels since 2014, pushing up gasoline costs for drivers. Fears of a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine are adding to supply concerns. This is because Russia is a major oil producer and could be hit by sanctions by the U.S. and Europe. All right, well, meanwhile, the U.S. is deploying more troops to Europe as stalled talks with Russia over its military buildup on Ukraine's borders raises fears of a possible invasion. President Joe Biden is sending roughly 2,000 troops from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to Poland and Germany this week. At the same time, about 1,000 troops based in Germany are shifting to Romania. Meanwhile, a leaked document published on Wednesday in Spanish newspaper El País says the U.S. could be willing to make a deal with Russia. This to ease tensions over missile deployments in Europe if Russia steps back from the brink in Ukraine. Britain's Royal Air Force says that fighter jets have been scrambled in response to 4 Russian aircraft approaching the UK. The Typhoon jets were launched from British Air Force bases in Scotland, and they were joined by a Voyager air-to-air refueling tanker launched from England. The force routinely intercepts approaching aircraft. Local officials say militiamen have attacked a camp for people fleeing violence in Congo's Ituri province overnight, killing at least 60 people staying at the shelter. Fighters with the group, known as Codeco, arrived at the Plaine Savo displaced persons site, where they used machetes and other weapons to kill dozens of people who were staying there. Turning to Haiti, where hundreds of people have crowded into a shelter as authorities say they're struggling to provide food and water to those affected. At least 4 people have died and 1 was reported missing after a cold front hit Haiti's northern and southern regions on Sunday. More than 2,580 homes were damaged, and some 500 people are staying in a temporary shelter in Fort Liberté. Haiti's Civil Protection Agency said Wednesday that people urgently need water, food, and blankets. The European Commission wants to include nuclear energy and natural gas in its plans for building a climate-friendly future. The proposal Wednesday from the European Commission divides member countries and has drawn outcry from environmentalists as greenwashing. The green labeling system would define what qualifies as an investment in sustainable energy in the 27-nation bloc. Under certain conditions, gas and nuclear energy could be part of the mix, making it easier for private investors to inject money into both. The plan will please nuclear-powered France and gas-dependent Germany, but critics call it a big blow to climate goals. Mexico's central bank says the money that migrants send home to their relatives grew 27% last year, totaling $51.6 billion U.S. That is a record for migrant remittances to Mexico and would surpass almost all other sources of its foreign income. The bank said on Tuesday that the phenomenon doesn't appear to be tailing off. Remittances in December grew to $4.76 billion. This is 30% more than in the same month of 2020. The percentage of Mexican households getting remittances has risen from 3.6% to 5.1%. Inflation, fed by high oil and gas prices, hit record levels in Europe for the third month in a row. European Union statistics agency Eurostat reported today that the 19 countries using the euro currency saw consumer prices increase by an annual rate of 5.1% in January. That is the highest since record-keeping started in 1997. And it broke previous records of 5% in December and 4.9% in November. Once again, soaring energy prices played a major role. A GoFundMe page created by a Canadian citizen has raised over $700,000 to provide clean drinking water for Indigenous communities. The fund will be spent by Water First Education and Training Incorporated to benefit their direct collaborative efforts with Indigenous communities. Megan Howarth, the page's creator, says she, quote, believes in the basic human right to clean water and believes in the power of a nation to fundraise for a cause. We'll have more information online at waterfirst.ngo. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.